Germany believed its most powerful weapon wasn't a battleship, bomber, or submarine. It was a machine so sophisticated that enemy nations believed it might never be broken. Military commanders trusted it with their most guarded secrets because they believed one thing with complete certainty: no enemy would ever read their messages. But in the spring of 1941, inside an ordinary English country house, a 19-year-old student noticed something everyone else had missed. She wasn't a cryptographer. She wasn't a military officer. She hadn't even finished university. Yet within 3 days of what she found, more than 2,000 Italian sailors would be dead, 3 heavy cruisers would be sunk, and one of the Royal Navy's greatest victories of the Second World War would already be underway. The most astonishing part? The men sailing toward that disaster never knew the battle had been lost before the first shell was fired. It had been lost hundreds of miles away, in a quiet room filled with papers, pencils, and people who officially did not exist. Bletchley Park, England, March 1941. On desks inside the British Code-Breaking Center sat stacks of intercepted Italian naval radio messages. Every page was covered in meaningless groups of letters created by the Italian Navy's version of the Enigma cipher machine. Somewhere inside those encrypted signals was everything the Royal Navy needed to know: the location of a fleet, its course, its orders, its destination. If those secrets remained hidden, British warships escorting vital convoys to Greece could sail straight into an ambush. Thousands of sailors might die before sunrise, and Britain could lose control of one of the war's most important seas. The answers were already there. The problem was that nobody could read them. And time was running out. These messages were not simply written in code. They had been transformed by the Italian Naval Enigma, a machine that sent every letter through rotating electrical circuits and turned it into a completely different one. Without the correct daily settings, the result looked like nonsense. By early 1941, Britain's codebreakers were beginning to make progress against the German Army and Luftwaffe versions of Enigma. But the Italian Navy presented a different challenge. Its machine was wired differently, its procedures were different, and unlike the Germans, the Italians sent far fewer messages. That created a problem no machine could solve. Every successful codebreak depends on patterns, but with only a trickle of intercepted traffic and almost no predictable phrases to work from, those patterns were incredibly difficult to find. Days could pass without a single useful clue. Most of Bletchley Park's resources were focused elsewhere. In the Atlantic, German U-boats were tearing through merchant shipping and threatening Britain's survival. Compared with that crisis, the small section working on Italian naval traffic was a lower priority. It operated from a modest cottage near the estate's stable yard, far from the growing teams and newly built bomb machines attacking German Enigma. Leading that overlooked section was Alfred Dilly Knox, one of Britain's most gifted codebreakers. Knox did not believe machines alone would solve the problem. He believed the real weakness was human. Years earlier, he had briefly broken the Italian Naval Enigma by painstakingly reconstructing its rotor wiring by hand, a method he called rodding. But after the Italians changed their procedures, that success vanished almost overnight. Now his small team was trying to do what many believed could no longer be done. They found fragments, hints, possibilities, but never enough to change the outcome of a battle. Then an ordinary university student arrived in Knox's cottage. Within days, she would notice the one mistake every expert had missed. Her name was Mavis Lever. She was 19 years old. She was not a mathematician. She had never designed a machine. She had never studied cryptography. Only months earlier, she had been a student at University College London, studying German literature and spending more time on crossword puzzles than military secrets. But to Dilly Knox, that was not a weakness. It was exactly what he wanted. Knox believed codebreaking was not only about mathematics, it was about people. Every encrypted message still began with a human being at a keyboard, someone who could become tired, distracted, rushed, overconfident, or careless. And sooner or later, every system was limited by the person operating it. When Mavis arrived, Knox did not give her months of formal training. He did not hand her a manual. He put a stack of intercepted Italian naval messages in front of her and gave her one instruction: see if anything looks odd. That was all. Day after day, Mavis studied line after line of random-looking 5-letter groups. Most seemed identical rows of meaningless letters with no obvious pattern and no clue where to begin. Hours became days. Days became weeks. The messages refused to reveal their secret. Around her, many believed the effort was hopeless. The Italian Naval Enigma produced too little traffic, too few patterns, and too few opportunities to make meaningful progress. Every failure seemed to reinforce the same conclusion: the cipher could not be broken fast enough to matter in war. But Knox never lost faith. Somewhere, hidden inside thousands of perfectly encrypted messages, one human mistake was waiting to be found. He just did not know who would find it first. Then, in the final week of March 1941, Mavis paused over a single intercept. At first glance, it looked no different from the hundreds she had already examined. In reality, it was the message that changed everything. Every experienced codebreaker knew one of Enigma's built-in rules: a letter in the original message could never encrypt as the same letter in the ciphertext. But this transmission seemed to break that rule, again and again. At first, it looked impossible. Then, Mavis considered something much simpler, an explanation so basic it almost seemed ridiculous. What if the operator had forgotten to switch the machine into cipher mode? If that had happened, the message would not be encrypted at all. It would be plain Italian, hiding in the middle of hundreds of encrypted signals. She began reading it. One word appeared again and again: personale. Personal. It was not an operational order. It was not a battle report. Most historians believe it was a routine test transmission, probably typed by an operator checking the machine before sending live traffic. But in one careless moment, he appears to have sent it without turning the cipher on. To him, it was probably meaningless. To Dilly Knox, it was the breakthrough his team had been waiting for. Now the plaintext and the intercepted message could be compared letter by letter. That single mistake gave Knox's team what they needed to recover the day's Enigma settings and begin reading surrounding Italian naval traffic. Not every message, not perfectly, but enough. Enough to reveal something extraordinary. Hidden among the intercepts was an operational order for the Regia Marina, the battleship Vittorio Veneto. 3 heavy cruisers and a screen of destroyers had sailed into the Mediterranean with orders to intercept British convoy traffic bound for Greece. The fleet believed its movements were secret. They weren't. Within hours, that intelligence reached Admiral Andrew Cunningham, commander of the British Mediterranean Fleet. And before the Italian sailors realized anyone knew they were coming, the trap had already begun to close. March 27, 1941, the decrypt that reached Cunningham was the kind of intelligence every admiral dreams of: not rumors, not guesses, but a fleet, a course, and a destination. But Cunningham understood something just as important as the intelligence itself. If the Italians suspected their Enigma messages had been read, Britain might lose one of its greatest secret weapons overnight. So he chose not to act immediately. Instead, the Royal Navy staged a deception. A reconnaissance flying boat was sent to discover the Italian fleet from the air. If the Italians intercepted British radio traffic afterward, They would assume they had been found by chance, not because their supposedly unbreakable cipher had failed. Late on March 27th, the aircraft spotted the Regia Marina exactly where the decrypt said it would be. That was all Cunningham needed. His battle fleet centered on HMS Warspite, Valiant, and Barham, with the carrier HMS Formidable, cruisers, and destroyers turned to intercept. Meanwhile, aboard the Italian flagship Vittorio Veneto, confidence remained high. Admiral Angelo Iachino believed he held the advantage. His force had slipped into the Mediterranean undetected and expected to catch British convoy escorts at a disadvantage. No one on the bridge knew the British were already waiting. On the afternoon of March 28, aircraft from HMS Formidable attacked. The first wave came in low over the sea as anti-aircraft fire erupted across the Italian formation. One torpedo slammed into Vittorio Veneto, damaging her stern and forcing the battleship to slow while the fleet turned west toward home. Then, hours later, British aircraft found another target, the heavy cruiser Pola. A torpedo struck amidships, crippling her engines and leaving the cruiser dead in the water as darkness gathered. To Admiral Iachino, it looked like an isolated emergency. Unwilling to abandon one of his finest ships, he ordered the heavy cruisers Zara and Fiume, along with 4 destroyers, to turn back and escort Pola to safety. It was a humane decision. It was also catastrophic, because while the Italian rescue force steamed toward the helpless cruiser, Cunningham's battleships were closing silently through the night. The British had radar. The Italians did not. Just before 10:30 p.m., British lookouts detected dark silhouettes ahead. The range was astonishingly short, barely more than point blank for ships armed with 15-inch guns. The Italians still had no idea the enemy was there. Then the darkness exploded. British searchlights snapped on. Massive guns fired almost at once, and within seconds, the Mediterranean became an execution ground. When dawn broke on March 29, 1941, the scale of the disaster was impossible to hide. The Regia Marina had lost 3 heavy cruisers, Zara, Fiume, and Pola, along with the destroyers Alfieri and Carducci. More than 200-300 Italian sailors were dead or missing. The Royal Navy had lost 1 aircraft and 3 aircrew. It was one of Britain's most decisive naval victories of the Mediterranean War. But the most important battle had not been fought with battleships. It had been fought with pencils, intercepted radio signals, and one extraordinary observation inside a quiet cottage at Bletchley Park. For the Italians, the defeat seemed to have an obvious explanation. British reconnaissance aircraft had located the fleet before the battle. As far as they knew, that was how Cunningham had intercepted them. They never realized the real disaster had begun days earlier, when a single operator accidentally transmitted a routine test message without encrypting it. That tiny mistake gave Knox's team the opening they needed to recover the day's Enigma settings and expose the movement of an entire fleet, and for security reasons, the people responsible could tell no one. Not their families, not their friends, not even many of the sailors whose lives they had helped save. Among them was Mavis Lever, later Mavis Batey after marrying fellow codebreaker Keith Batey during the war. She went on working at Bletchley Park, helping Knox attack other enemy cipher systems, including the Abwehr's Enigma, used by German military intelligence. Those later successes became part of the wider intelligence effort that supported Allied deception before D-Day. For decades, almost no one knew her name. The Official Secrets Act kept Bletchley's work hidden long after the war ended, and the people who had changed history returned quietly to ordinary lives. But Cape Matapan reveals something extraordinary. Germany and Italy trusted machines. Britain trusted people. And in the end, One of the greatest naval victories of the Second World War was not won by the biggest guns or the fastest ships. It began because a 19-year-old literature student noticed what everyone else had missed. History is not always decided where the shooting starts. Sometimes it is decided in silence by the person patient enough to see the one mistake no one else can. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe for more hidden moments from World War II stories where history turned not on brute force, but on intelligence, deception, and the people working in the shadows.